What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Let's Ask Paul. My name is Paul Abernathy, your host, and welcome to the podcast. If you've never listened to me before, you're in for a treat. We're going to talk about a specific area of the National Electrical Code that has caused quite a bit of debate on social media. And I'm going to tell you, you all know my opinion of social media, so it is what it is. I won't rehash all that. But again, I always tell people, you got to think about the source of people that are giving you these arguments on social media, or how the disagreements go and how things can turn south really quickly and everybody wants to pound their chest. So, this is why on TikTok I don't do comments anymore because, again, it doesn't matter. Even when somebody's wrong, they just will not let it die. And it basically taints your entire educational process when you have people mixing in BS, and it just doesn't make well for education on those type of platforms where people can just banter back and forth, and then somebody strolls into it and they have no clue what's going on and they don't know who to believe, and now they get even more confused than they were at the beginning. So that's not to say that we don't have some good educators out there on these platforms. I mean, there's some great ones out there, but again, it's ripe for misinformation. So I just choose not to get into it there. People know that if they want questions answered from me, that they can go to paulabernathy.com, or they can go on our website, or they can get our mobile app and ask questions through our mobile app. There's just other ways to do it. The most preferred, obviously, is through paulabernathy.com. That allows me to really have you give me really good details of your question, and then I can, like the code section, or maybe you're asking me about a certain cycle of the code. Be very specific. And if you're working on the 2017, let me know that. If you want an answer in the 2020, let me know that type of thing. Okay. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about this posting that people do over on social media. There's a gentleman who's propagating really false information, and he puts himself out there as an expert, and he lives down in Florida. And no, it's not who you think I'm talking about. This person also lives down in Florida, happens to live 30 or 40 miles from the better known gentleman that lives in Florida. And this guy's on TikTok and social media, and he's really starting to spread things that are just not true. They're obviously his opinion, and they're not accurate. But okay, again, that's what spawned me to put out the video. Trust your source. And really give a lot of thought to when people start spitting stuff out. What is their background? What have they done in the system? Ask them to show you any public inputs that they've submitted through the years. Really ask them for stuff rather than just believing what they say. So there's an example here where somebody asks us, can you re-identify let's say a blue wire, or a blue conductor, or a black conductor, or a red conductor in a multi-conductor cable? Can you re-identify it as a grounded conductor with white or gray outer finish, or by adding, white or gray tape or something like that to identify it as a grounded conductor, even though it was originally a blue, a black, or a red? So it's quite interesting because I was actually in the room. I'm on this code panel. This is code panel 5, and this is under 200, more specifically 200.6E. And I remember the debates, the arguments, and the discussions that were revolving around this. And obviously, working for a wire and cable manufacturer, we understood that, look, the cable's already made. Nobody's going to pull new wires in. Nobody's going to be confused. The cable's already pre-done. It's not like a raceway where you can pull conductors in and out and things like that. It's already pre-done cable assembly. Okay, so that is some assurance that it's whatever's there is going to stay there. So what you have is subtle changes that took place to 200.6E, where there was an exception in there that allowed you to re-identify a conductor in a multi-conductor cable, and you re-identify it by using distinctive white or gray markings or other equally effective means, labeling or whatever. Equally effective meaning it's very clear what it's being used as, okay? I think the easiest thing to do is use white or gray tape. It's probably the easiest thing to do, but it's not the only way you can do it. So anyway, I'm going to read you 200.6e, and there's a gentleman out there who's propagating, for example, that you can't do that. And he's absolutely wrong because of the way this code, and I'm going to break this down for you. And then now, if he wants to change the code, I'm going to tell you then the easiest thing you can do is submit a public input. Right now, you're going to have to wait until probably 2027 when we start taking public inputs for the 2029 edition of the NEC. Hopefully, I'll be retired by then. But anyway, at least from the code panels, I'm getting a little bit up on that. So look at 200.6e and let's read it and let's dissect this thing. All right, it says E, grounded conductors of multi-conductor cables. So we're talking about creating the grounded conductor or having a grounded conductor. So here's what it says. It says the insulated grounded conductor in a multi-conductor cable shall be identified by a continuous white or gray outer finish or by 3 continuous white or gray stripes on other than green insulation along its entire length. Okay, so that's the first sentence. So basically, the grounded conductor inside of a multi-conductor cable, the general rule here is that it needs to be white or it needs to be gray finish continuously in its entire length. Or you could have 3 continuous white or gray stripes on its continuous length. And of course, this can't be done on insulation that is green. Makes sense? Sure. So it could be black, blue, red, whatever, and have 3 white or gray stripes on it. And it would be okay to use that as a grounded conductor. That would be fine. Okay, so then the next sentence goes, for conductors that are 4 AWG or larger in cables, identification of the grounded conductor shall be permitted to comply with 200.6b. So that is the rule in 200.6b that says, okay, well, they're 4 and larger, then they could be continuous white, they could be continuous gray, they could have the 3 continuous white or gray stripes, just like what it previously said. But then it has an item 4, this is B4, and it says that at the time of the installation can be identified by distinctive white or gray markings at its termination. Okay, and these markings shall encircle the conductor's insulation. Okay, that's at the time of installation. So that would allow me, by the way, just so you know, that is 200.6b. That is not specific to a cable. That is raceways. That is basically, that is the generic application for the re-identification if you're going to choose that option for the grounded conductor. Okay, that is not a multi-conductor cable assembly rule. So this is why it sends it back to that, saying, you know what, if you're 4 and larger, you can follow those rules. That's fine. Now, it goes on to say for multi-conductor flat cables with conductors that are 4 and larger, an external ridge shall be permitted to identify the grounded conductor. Okay, so if you have a flat cable, let's say like a larger UF cable, then let's say you could actually put little ridges on it. And that would identify that as the grounded conductor. Okay, that's fine. So now you get down to the question that people ask. They say, well, what about 6 and smaller? All right, so then you get down to exception number 1. So exception number 1 is saying conductors within multi-conductor cables shall be permitted to be re-identified at their terminations at the time of installation by a distinct white or gray marking or other equally effective means. Now, I was in the room during this discussion, and a lot of people are going to say, well, Paul, this is contradictory here. Why say in the general code language we call the charging statement of 200.6e, it makes a mention to 4 and larger that you go to 200.6b, and which gives a provision to re-identify? Well, if everybody thinks that this exception number 1 only applies to 4 and larger, then you would not have had any need for that statement inside of 200.6e, right? You wouldn't have any need for that. The fact of the matter is, it's telling you if it's 4 and larger, follow the rules in 200.6b. But if it's 6 and smaller, this says conductors within multi-conductor cables shall be permitted to be re-identified at their termination at the time of installation. So that's going to be applicable to 6 and smaller. Now, there's some people that will argue this and say, no, that's not what it meant. But that is what we discussed at Code Panel 5 when this happened. Now, people say, well, why don't you just get rid of the 4 and larger? And that way, the exception applies to all of them. Well, we could have done that. The problem is, during the meeting, we couldn't all agree. Obviously, the wire and cable manufacturers, we felt, look, it shouldn't matter. It's a cable assembly. It's set. A certain number of conductors are in there already. What does it matter if we take a blue conductor and re-identify it as a white? Why should it matter? And some people said, no, it can only apply to 4 and larger. Well, if that was the case, then you wouldn't need the exception. Think about it, folks. It already makes a reference to 4 and larger in the charging statement. What do you need the exception for unless it applies to 6 and smaller? Think about it. Look at the question. Look at the actual code language again. Now, let's say you take out the portion about the 4 and larger. Then exception number 1 will apply to all sizes, correct? We can agree to that. Now, you put the statement about 4 and larger, it's permitted to comply with 200.6b. It's a permissive language. It shall be permitted. So to me, the exception number 1, and there's people that are going to disagree with this, but being the industry that I'm in, and being that we like, in this case, the ambiguity of the way the code is written for the AHJ to make an interpretation, there would be no reason to have exception number 1 if you only intended 4 and larger to be re-identified in a multi-conductor cable. Why would you even need exception number 1? Because you're already getting the permission to do that in the second sentence of 200.6e. You're already getting that permission. So what's the point of the exception then? So the reason was, under the exception previously, you could re-identify based on maintenance and supervision. And then the argument was, and I believe Phil Simmons is the one that submitted the public input, and we all debated it during the meeting, and it's like, it doesn't make sense. Because the cable assembly is already set, the conductors, it doesn't matter whether they're 4 or larger or 6 gauge or 14 gauge or 12. It wouldn't matter in that cable assembly. Why? Because we already do similar re-identification practices in 200.7c1. And that typically is for 3-ways and 4-way switch loops and re-identification. And those are smaller conductors, 14, 12, 10. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't hurt anything. We didn't need any special permission. We didn't need any maintenance or supervision. We already get permission to do that. So it didn't make sense to have that in the exception. And then during that debate, during Code Panel 5, it was discussed that, we'll leave the part in there about 4 and larger because we don't want to get into creating code. We don't want to take it as a code panel and start ripping it apart. It's still applicable that if it's 4 and larger, you can follow the rules in 200.6b, which is be re-identification. But you also have the exception number 1 that says, okay, any size of conductor that's in a multi-conductor cable, you're permitted to re-identify it. And for the people that say, no, the exception only applies to 4 and larger, why in the hell would you have the second sentence that's referencing 4 and larger? Let that sink in. Now, if you think that's an error from the code panel, then you have your opportunity to submit a public input, not until 2027 now, by the way, because we're already beyond the public inputs. In fact, we've already voted on the public inputs for the 2026. That's already been voted. We'll have an episode where I go over some of the results from the voting. But so at this point, that exception must apply to all sizes. Otherwise, there is no point in having the second sentence in there. Okay? So again, there's a gentleman that disagrees with that, and there is one statement that he makes that he just goes way off and says that this rule was never intended for grounded conductors when the whole damn title of 200.6e is what? Grounded conductors of multi-conductor cables. That's the whole topic that we're having, okay? So when you look at the exception, it's very clear. It says conductors within multi-conductor cables shall be permitted to be re-identified at their terminations at the time of installation by distinctive white or gray. Well, what the hell are they going to apply to? It has no, you wouldn't apply this to a white. It's already white. You wouldn't apply this to a gray. It's already gray. So what are you applying it to? You're applying it to maybe an extra blue one that you have, or a red one that you have, or a black one that you have that you're not using. Okay. In your normal circuit, you got this extra conductor and you're like, dude, hey, I need a neutral. I need a grounded conductor. Boom. If it's a multi-conductor cable, this allows you to be able to re-identify it. Makes sense? So this is why I tell you folks, unless you're sitting in on the code panel, unless you can hear the discussions, and I encourage everybody to come to code panel meetings. It's a great experience if you've never had it, and listen to the conversations. I was there. I was in this conversation. There was never an intent for the exception number 1 to only apply to 4 and larger, because it would make the second sentence pointless. Now, people say, well, if you wanted this to apply to all conductors, then what's the point of the second sentence? Well, it was because we just couldn't get consensus to remove it. But we did have consensus on the exception number 1 and how it should be applied, right? I was there. I heard it. We had the discussion, and that's why we did not argue it and felt that it was acceptable to move it forward. And I can tell you, I don't see any proposals for the 2026 to change that or remove that. So that's kind of where we ended it up. Okay. So hopefully that clears the air on a multi-conductor cable when it comes to being able to re-identify the grounded conductor. Now, when would you do that? Just for craps and giggles. If I had a 12-3 and I had a black, red, blue, and a white, and that was a multi-wire branch circuit, distinctively 3 circuits that share a neutral, okay, because a multi-wire branch circuit allows me to do that. Or obviously it could be used in a 3-phase application, but what if I wanted to have a cable and I needed 2 separate neutrals, okay? If that was the case, right, where I have, for example, multiple circuits, and I'm going to try to meet the rules of 200.4b, which is for multiple circuits. And so let's say that I want to have this separate, separate circuit. So, like a black with the white, and then maybe a red with a white, but I don't have another white in there. So I can take the blue and re-identify it in that multi-conductor cable assembly. Now, people ask me, what is a multi-conductor? It's 2 or more. So any cable that has 2 or more is a multi-conductor cable, okay? Don't overthink that type of scenario. But we want to remember that 200.4 says neutral conductors shall not be used for more than 1 branch circuit, okay? Or it says for more than 1 multi-wire branch circuit, right? Well, maybe you have a 12-3 that you want to convert to 2 separate branch circuits and not have a multi-wire branch circuit. Well, this is how you would do it. You take the blue, you re-identify it. In a multi-conductor cable assembly like that, there is no hazard. There is no harm. It's not going to hurt anything. Conductors can't be pulled out. We can't increase the size and cause a problem. It's already preset from the manufacturer. So that was a whole argument that was made. Now, that can't be the same for raceways. That's why you have the sizing and break point from 6 and smaller and 4 and larger in 200.6 for identification of the grounded conductor. But again, 4 and larger, you do have that re-identification allowance. But when you get to multi-conductor cables, you're given the permission, because it is a cable assembly and a multi-conductor, that you can re-identify. And it's not size specific for that exception, okay? And again, people that say, but yes, it only applies to 4 and larger, that is not true. You wouldn't need the second sentence if that was the case. Why would you have an exception saying that conductors of a multi-conductor cable can be re-identified if the code general requirement already says that you can do it at 4 and larger? Why would you even need the exception? So again, at the end of the day, folks, be careful in your trusted sources. Make sure you do your due diligence. Don't just listen to what people say on social media. Use a little common sense, and you too can get to the answers. Till next time, folks, stay safe. God bless.